Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I turned 42 last year. I thought by now I would have figured things out. I had not, but I knew one thing for sure. The drought was real. You could not ignore the news. The reservoirs were dust bowls. The local river was a trickle. Everyone was worried about water restrictions. Our state was dying of thirst. The HOA, the Preserve Creek Board, kept sending out their notices about brown lawns. They said we had to keep things neat. They did not care that the planet was baking. They just cared about curb appeal. I decided to do something about it. Something smart, something legal. I spent weeks researching rainwater harvesting systems. I found a top-tier company. I pulled the county permits myself. I checked the state laws. Everything was above board. It was all legal. I wanted no problems. The system they put in was high-end. It cost me nearly all my savings. They dug deep. They installed a massive cistern underground. It held thousands of gallons of water. Once the dirt was back, you could not see a thing. There was just a small heavy metal access plate set flush with the ground. It was perfect. It had overflow safety drains and a fine mesh barrier. No mosquitoes could get in. It was designed to save water, money, and the environment. I felt proud. I felt like I was prepared. I felt like I was finally ahead of the curve. The system ran for 2 weeks. I watched the weather reports hoping for rain. It rained hard one night. I could hear the downspouts working perfectly. The cistern was filling up. It was a good feeling, a feeling of self-reliance. Then Tuesday hit. I drove my truck into the subdivision right at 5:30. I was tired from a long day at the shipping firm. But I saw it right away. My truck slowed down, pulling into the driveway. I slammed on the brakes. The whole front yard was a disaster zone. It looked like a tank had driven over it. The grass was peeled back in strips. There were massive deep tire tracks carved into the mud. The small, neat flower beds were crushed. I got out of the truck. My hands were shaking. I walked across the ruined lawn. The neat plastic pipes the installers had used to channel the water were ripped right out of the ground. They were severed, like they were cut with giant scissors. They were just lying there, half buried in the churned earth. The heavy metal access plate to the cistern was gone. The specialized fittings were gone. There was a ragged, muddy hole where the underground tank was supposed to be. The whole unit, the entire expensive, professionally installed tank, was just ripped clean out. This was not vandalism. This was a demolition. I felt a cold rush of sickness. Who had the right to do this? I walked straight across the street to Tom's house. He was out front. He was spraying water from a little plastic bottle onto his prized rose bush. He avoided my eyes. "Tom, what happened here? Tell me right now," I demanded. My voice was low. It felt dangerous. Tom sighed. He looked down at his shoes. He seemed deeply uncomfortable. "Look, I told you about David, man," Tom whispered. "He was here yesterday, all day. He had a rented backhoe, a big one, 2 guys in reflective vests. David Miller, the HOA president?" I asked, my voice rising. "He sent heavy machinery onto my private property. He dug up and stole my system." Tom nodded once. He still would not look at me. He was yelling orders. He had Jane, the admin girl, out here with a clipboard. He said he had an emergency removal order. He said your system was a water hazard under the covenants. "A water hazard," I yelled. "It was underground. It was sealed. What did he do with it?" "They loaded it onto a flatbed trailer," Tom muttered. "They drove it out through the gate." "Look, man, I told him it was legal, that you had permits. He just waved the rule book at me. He said you did not submit a formal architectural review committee request and that he had the right to seize all unauthorized water retention assets." I knew this was garbage. David was twisting a rule meant for pools and ponds to justify his theft. He was drunk on his petty power. I turned and walked back to my truck. I needed to see this emergency order. I needed proof of this stupidity. I drove straight for the HOA office near the entrance gate. The main office light was still on. I threw the door open. Jane, the admin, was typing something on her computer. She was young, maybe early 20s, and always nervous. She flinched when she saw me. "The office is closed, sir." "Do not tell me the office is closed," I said, walking right up to the desk. "You were just at my house. You watched David Miller destroy my property and steal a $10,000 system. I need the removal order. I need the documentation." He cited. Jane pushed her chair back slightly. She was breathing fast. "Mr. Miller signed the service order. It's official board action. It states you did not follow the proper procedure for subsurface construction." "Show me the rule," I instructed. I leaned over the counter. "Show me the section that lets a volunteer organization use a backhoe on private land." She flipped open a massive spiral-bound book of covenants and bylaws. Her finger trembled as she traced a line. Section 4, subsection C, paragraph 12, she read quickly, rushing the words. It grants the board discretion to order immediate abatement and removal of unapproved water retention structures due to potential health or safety hazards, including but not limited to mosquito breeding grounds or drowning risk. Drowning risk. I was incredulous. It was under 5 feet of dirt. Are you trying to tell me I failed to notify the committee about a potential subterranean swimming pool? Jane did not answer. She just avoided my eyes. She slid a long sealed envelope across the desk. This is your official notice and statement of account, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I ripped the envelope open. The paper inside felt stiff and hateful. The first line was the fine, $5,000 for unauthorized underground alterations. The second line was the bill, $2,300 for emergency equipment rental and land restoration. They were charging me for the privilege of destroying my yard and stealing my property. The total was over $7,000. I am not paying this. This is theft, I stated plainly. I am going to the police right now and filing a report. You can tell David Miller that. Jane finally looked up. Her eyes were wide and she looked desperate. Sir, please, you cannot do that. He knows you are upset. He has already filed paperwork. I ignored her. I walked out and got back in my truck. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The ravine borders the back end of the subdivision. It is mostly dry, scrubby land where old construction materials get dumped. I drove the service road until I saw a break in the trees. I stopped. I climbed out and walked toward the edge of the deep drop. The air was cold now. There they were, the massive plastic water tanks. They looked small and defeated lying in the trash and concrete below. They were bent out of shape from the removal. They were useless now. And there it was, sticking out on the largest ruined tank. A bright white square sticker. It looked official. It was the HOA's logo with bold black text underneath. Confiscated for neighborhood preservation. It felt like a deliberate insult. I called the police. I had my phone against my ear as I climbed back up to the road. I explained everything calmly to the officer. The destruction, the theft, the official sticker, the HOA president's misuse of power. The officer sounded like a robot. He kept interrupting me to confirm the address. Sir, he finally said, his voice slow and deliberate, we show a pre-report filed on this location yesterday afternoon by a Mr. David Miller, president of the Preserve Creek Homeowners Association. I felt the blood drain from my face. A pre-report, what does that even mean? Mr. Miller advised us that the board had performed an official, covenant-based asset removal, the officer continued. He stated that due to a prior history of non-compliance, he anticipated a delusional and volatile resident would attempt to file a false theft report. I could not breathe. David had used his lawyer training to neutralize me before I even acted. He stated, the officer went on, that any subsequent action taken by you would be considered a form of harassment against official HOA volunteers carrying out their duties. We have classified this as a civil dispute, sir. We cannot get involved in covenant enforcement. You need to contact your attorney. He hung up. No warning, no pity. He just disconnected. I stood there in the dark, robbed of my property, fined thousands of dollars, and now the one avenue of real authority, the police, had been sealed off by David Miller. He had locked every door. This was not just a fine anymore. He had made me a criminal in their eyes. He had made me helpless. If I tried to touch the tanks, it would be trespassing. If I fought him, he would call it harassment. I had no choice now. I was trapped. I had to fight his rules with my own, but I needed something bigger than a bylaw fight. I needed dirt. I needed leverage. And David just showed me how brutal he was willing to be. I spent the next week living in a fog. The ruined yard looked worse every morning. The big gaping hole where my cistern was felt like a hole right through my chest. The police had left me out to dry. They said it was civil. That meant David Miller was untouchable. I dragged the covenant book out of the office, the one Jane had used. I read every page, every word. I highlighted things. I drank too much coffee. I am not a lawyer. I work in shipping, but I could see the system. David, the retired lawyer, had written the bylaws to be vague on purpose. Section 4, subsection C. Paragraph 12, the water retention rule, was a huge mess. It mentioned pools and ponds, but then it used the phrase any unapproved capacity over 500 gallons. My cistern was bigger than that. It was designed to save water. David made it illegal. The way the rule was written gave the board, which meant David, all the power to decide what was a hazard. I realized I couldn't beat him with his own rule book. It was a rigged game. His entire system was set up like a trap. On Friday afternoon, I was trying to patch the worst of the mud in the yard. I was just throwing dirt back into the big hole. I heard a car door shut. I stood up. My hands were covered in mud. It was David Miller. He was standing by his huge black SUV. He wore ironed khaki shorts and a polo shirt. He looked like he was modeling for a retirement brochure. He had a slight smirk on his face. He walked over slowly. He was carrying a folded piece of paper. He did not look at the mud mess he caused. "Good afternoon," David said. His voice was smooth and too loud. "I thought I would deliver this personally. Save the association postage. You already stole my property," I said. "You already broke the law and then called the police to stop me from reporting it. What do you want now?" David chuckled. It was a short, sharp noise. "I want compliance. You are currently in default on the fine and the removal costs. That's a serious matter. That fine is illegal. That removal was theft," I told him. "I'm fighting it." "You are welcome to try," David replied. He shrugged, looking bored. "But you know how these things go. Legal fees add up. The board is protected. You are just one person with a mortgage and a job." He stopped smiling. His eyes got cold. "Let me be clear," David said, leaning in slightly. "Your continued fight is disruptive. It affects the perceived stability of the entire neighborhood. When residents cause instability, banks notice. Companies notice. It would be a real shame if your fight with the Preserve Creek Board started bleeding into other areas of your life. Areas like, say, your credit rating, or your career path at that shipping firm." I felt a punch of fear hit my stomach. It was a direct threat. How did he know about my job? "Stay out of my personal life, David," I warned him. "We are the board," David said, his tone casual again. "We protect the Preserve Creek community. We know everything that affects it. Now about this." He unfolded the paper he was carrying. He held it out to me. It was another fine notice. This one was bright yellow. "This is a second issue," David explained, still smiling. "A new violation, effective immediately. We were able to identify it during the inspection of your property before the removal procedure." I snatched the yellow paper. "Violation, unauthorized decorative light pollution. Infraction, improper spectrum and intensity of front-facing lighting element. Specifically, the floodlight mounted above your garage door. Fine, $500. Recurring fine of $50 per day until corrected." I looked at the fine. I looked at David. "This light has been here for 3 years," I said. "It's a standard LED floodlight. It is not bothering anyone. It produces a light spectrum designated unauthorized blue-white," David stated, tapping the paper. "It reflects too brightly off the road surface. It's in the covenants. Page 194, Section H. I suggest you change it by the weekend. You are just making up rules to harass me," I said. My voice was tight. "I am enforcing the covenants," David corrected me smoothly. "The total balance due is now $7,800, plus the daily fines. Pay it or we move to a lien. Have a good evening." He turned and got into his SUV. He drove off. He did not look back. I stood there holding the 2 hateful notices, $7,800, for a cistern and a light bulb. David was not just trying to win. He was trying to destroy me financially. He was trying to show me he could target me for anything. That night I was sitting at my kitchen table. I was staring at the invoices. I was thinking about lawyers. I could not afford one. Then I heard a light tapping noise on the window. I jumped up. I looked out. It was dark. I saw nothing. I walked to the front door and opened it quickly. No one was there. I looked down. There was a single small piece of folded printer paper on the welcome mat. It was folded into a tiny square. I picked it up. I went back inside and unfolded it. The note was written in rushed handwriting, shaky in blue ink. It had 3 lines. 1. Look at the contracts. 2. Pool filter company $150,000. 3. Vendor K Systems. That was it. No name, no signature. I immediately went to the HOA's public document section online. Every HOA has to keep financial records open to residents. I found the budget reports. They were dense and hard to read. I found the expenses section. There it was, an entry for annual pool filtration maintenance and system upgrades. The amount was $150,000. Wait, our subdivision had a small community pool. It was maybe 50 feet long. It was old. It was almost always closed. No pool that size needed $150,000 in annual maintenance. That was insane. I looked at the vendor name. K Systems, LLC. I took the computer and opened the State Business Registry website. I typed in K Systems, LLC. The information popped up immediately. The registered address was a small, dusty mail forwarding office downtown. A ghost address. I scrolled down to find the registered agent, the person in charge. The name was Kevin Miller. My blood ran cold. Kevin Miller. The name sounded familiar. I remembered the board meeting minutes I had skimmed earlier. I went back and checked the list of board members. David Miller was the president, Maria was the secretary, and a younger guy, listed as a community liaison on the board, was named Kevin Miller, David's nephew. I sat back in my chair. The 2 fines and the cistern theft suddenly made complete horrifying sense. The pool was the source of a massive cash grab. David was using his board power to authorize ridiculous payments to his own nephew's shell company. He was stealing from the association, and my cistern, it was removed under a bylaw meant for pools. He used the pool rule to remove my system because he was terrified I might accidentally uncover his massive pool fraud. This was not about light pollution or property lines. It was about embezzlement. It was about covering up $150,000 of theft. I had found the dirt. But David was already moving to foreclose on my house. I had to expose this before I lost everything. I needed more proof. I needed to know how the rest of the board felt about Kevin's sudden wealth. The confrontation was coming. I had to face them. I sat at my kitchen table folding the printouts over and over. They were my only weapon. The page showing the $150,000 payment to K Systems. The printout proving Kevin Miller, David's nephew, ran K Systems. It was all a circle of theft. The board meeting was on Tuesday night. It was at the clubhouse. The clubhouse is tiny. It always feels too small and smells like old chlorine. I put the papers inside a worn manila envelope. My hands were shaking. I was going to call David out in front of the whole neighborhood. I drove over an hour early. I wanted to scope the place out. As I pulled up, I saw Maria walking toward the back door. Maria was the secretary on the board. She was usually quiet. She looked different today. She wore a heavy blue jacket even though it was still warm outside. She looked pale. I quickly parked and walked toward her. "Maria," I called out. She jumped. She looked terrified to see me. "Oh, hi," she mumbled. She glanced nervously at the clubhouse door. "I'm just early, setting up the refreshments." "Maria, I need to talk to you," I said. "It's about the $150,000 for the pool filters K Systems. It's Kevin Miller's company. Your co-board member." Maria pressed her lips together. She shook her head quickly. "I can't, not here. I really can't talk about that. I need to go." She fumbled with the key in the back door. She did not meet my eyes once. She looked like she was about to throw up. She unlocked the door and slipped inside, locking it instantly behind her. I stood there for a minute. She knew something. She looked trapped. She was my first hint of an ally, but she was scared stiff. I went back to my truck and waited. Slowly, people started showing up. About 30 people total. Mostly older folks who liked to complain about teenagers and noise. They were the ones David always listened to. David Miller arrived right on time. He carried a big leather briefcase. He strode in like he owned the place. He saw me standing near the entrance and did not even look at me. He just walked past. The meeting started right at 7. David sat at the head of a long folding table. Maria was next to him, staring down at her. Notes Kevin Miller, the nephew, was there too. He was dressed like he was going to a club, but he was taking things seriously. Carol, a retired teacher known for yelling about flowerpot colors, was on the other side. She looked hostile. David opened the meeting. He started talking about the budget. He talked about rising costs and fiscal responsibility. The hypocrisy was thick enough to choke on. Finally, he opened the floor for resident comments. My heart pounded. I stood up. 30 heads turned toward me. "I have a point of order regarding the budget," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. David cut me off immediately. "Mr. Johnston, this portion of the agenda is for general feedback. Financial inquiries must be submitted in writing 48 hours in advance. This is not just an inquiry," I countered. "This is about fraud. I have evidence that the board is wasting $150,000 a year on a pool filter contract with K Systems, LLC, a company owned by Kevin Miller." I slammed the manila envelope onto the folding table. The noise echoed in the small room. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. David did not even flinch. He was completely calm. He banged his gavel hard. "Bang, bang. Order," he shouted. The noise died down fast. He was good at this. "Mr. Johnston is currently delinquent on over $7,000 of association fines," David announced to the room. He made it sound like I was a criminal. "He is attempting to distract from his own unauthorized property destruction and the imminent legal action being taken against his residents. You stole my cistern. You are stealing from all of us," I yelled. Kevin, the nephew, leaned over and spoke into David's ear. He smirked at me. David nodded to him. "Furthermore," David continued, his voice dripping with authority, "the company K Systems is a legitimate, large-scale vendor. Any accusation of fraud or self-dealing is unverified hearsay and character assassination. It will not be tolerated in this forum. It's your nephew, it's a shell company, I protested. I pointed at the board. Mr. Johnston, David said, his voice now steel, you are out of order, your time is concluded. You have disrupted a legal board meeting with defamatory statements. If you do not sit down, I will have the sheriff's department remove you for trespassing. He had an answer for everything. He used the law like a shield. I felt defeated. I was one guy with a blurry printout against a lawyer with a gavel and 30 confused neighbors. I sat back down hard. The rest of the meeting was a blur. I just kept watching Maria. She was avoiding David's gaze. She looked sick. The meeting ended. David adjourned it quickly. Everyone stood up and started grabbing cookies and talking about the light pollution fine I had gotten. They were talking about me. David was already talking to Carol about setting up a special audit to prove my lies. I stood by the folding chairs watching. Maria was stacking plastic cups. As she walked past me carrying a tray of cups, she suddenly swayed a little. She seemed to stumble. She bumped right into me. "Excuse me," she muttered, not looking at my face. When she pulled away, I felt something in my palm. I quickly closed my fist around it. It was a small, tightly folded piece of paper, thicker than the last note. I waited until I was out the door and standing in the dark parking lot before I looked at it. It was not shaky handwriting this time. It was a neat small note typed on a professional laser printer. It said, K Systems is a fake. It's a cutout. The real vendor is Aquarian Solutions, Corp. P.O. Box 511. They are offshore. David is paying Aquarian, then kicking back to K Systems. This is the real name. Use it. I quickly shoved the note into my pocket. My hands were slick with cold sweat. Aquarian Solutions. A bigger fish. An offshore company. This was not a small-time scheme. This was huge money laundering. I got in my truck and drove home. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had better proof now. I had the real name. David could not shut me down with lies if I had the paper trail from an offshore vendor. I pulled into my driveway. The floodlight above my garage was still shining that brilliant, unauthorized blue-white. I parked the truck and got out. The porch light was flickering. I walked up to my front door. Taped right across the peephole was a large envelope. It was marked Certified Legal Notice in thick black letters. It was from a law firm I did not know. The HOA's lawyers. I ripped it off the door. I tore the thick paper open. I scanned the first paragraph. The words jumped off the page. Acceleration of debt and commencement of foreclosure proceedings. They were not just threatening anymore. Because I did not pay the $7,800 in fines and fees, they were using a clause in the covenants. They were putting a lien on my house. They were starting the process to take my property. David was not waiting for the evidence. He was moving to destroy me before I could even use it. I dropped the paper. It floated down onto the muddy grass of my ruined lawn. I was losing my house over a stolen rain barrel and a $500 light bulb. The confrontation had just cost me everything. The foreclosure notice sat on my kitchen table like a brick. They were really going to do it. They were going to steal my house over $7,800. David Miller was playing for keeps. I had nothing left to lose now. I had to find Maria. She was the only person who knew the truth, and she had given me the name of the offshore company, Aquarian Solutions. I could not call her. David would be listening to everything. I drove to the biggest grocery store in the next town over. I knew Maria shopped there. I parked way in the back corner of the lot. I waited. After 40 minutes she showed up. She was in a small, practical sedan. She looked tired. She walked into the store. I waited 5 minutes, then I walked in. I went straight for the paper goods aisle, which was always empty. I waited near the napkins. She found me there about 10 minutes later. She looked around nervously. She put a bag of flour into her cart. "Maria," I whispered. She spun around. Her eyes were huge. "Are you insane? You can't be here. He will know." "He already knows everything," I said, my voice low and tight. "He is trying to take my house. He sent me foreclosure papers. I'm desperate. I need to know why. Why did he use the pool rule to steal my cistern?" Maria pushed her cart closer to me. She was almost shaking. "It's not just the pool money. That's the clean part. That's just the budget fraud. That's Kevin's side deal." "What's the other part?" I asked. "The real part." She looked down the long aisle. There was no one there. "Your cistern," she started, speaking fast and quiet. "It was installed exactly on top of the connection point." "The ground connection." I did not understand. "What connection? It was just dirt." "David runs an illegal water line," she confessed. She looked completely defeated. "It is not on any plat map. It is not registered with the county. He tapped into the main subdivision feed way back behind the old pump station. He ran a line, a cheap PVC line. It runs underground right along the back perimeter and then out." My mind raced. "Out to where?" He sells it, Maria said, tears starting in her eyes. He sells our neighborhood water. He sells it to a private commercial bottling plant outside the city limits. He does it through Aquarian Solutions. That's why that offshore name is so important. I felt sick. David was not just stealing our dues. He was stealing our essential resources during a massive drought. He used the $150,000 to cover the maintenance of the illegal pump and line, Maria continued. He used the pool bylaw to take your cistern because it was placed right over the main tap line on his theft system. If the installation crew had kept digging, they would have found his crime. So he destroyed my property to cover up grand larceny, I summarized. Yes, she whispered. And I have the proof. I can get the proof. She pulled out her phone. Her hands were still shaking. I'm the board secretary. I still have access to the old shared files. I found a hidden folder. It's got the actual sales ledger. It's got the real budgets. I can send you the spreadsheet. We walked quickly down to the frozen food section. The hum of the freezers provided some cover. Maria worked fast. Her phone screen was bright. She navigated through files and codes. She looked completely stressed out. This is the internal spreadsheet, she said. It shows the payments received from the bottling plant, disguised as miscellaneous land lease income. And look here, she pointed to a column. It shows the exact coordinates of the tap line, the one that was under your cistern. I looked at the screen. My eyes burned as I tried to absorb the numbers. It was all there. Names, dates, massive transfers of money, a secret second budget, the coordinates. This was everything. Send it to me now, I urged her. I need the whole thing. I can't send it by email, she said. David tracks board emails. I have to download it and print it. I can't print it here. We quickly moved to a nearby library. We found a small dark corner by the reference books. She plugged a tiny thumb drive into a public computer. She worked with incredible speed. He is using the fines and the foreclosure to bury you, Maria explained while the printer whirred slowly across the room. He thinks if he makes you a criminal debtor, no one will listen to your claims of fraud. He's right, I said. He already got the police to shut me down. The printer stopped. Maria rushed over. She pulled out the pages. It was about 30 pages of financial data. Suddenly her phone buzzed on the desk. She looked at the screen. Her whole body went rigid. Her face drained of color. Oh no, she breathed. Oh no, what is it? I asked. She quickly unlocked the screen and held. Get away from me. It's David. He is not calling about the board. He sent a text. She put the phone on the desk, face up. I could see the message preview. It read, Maria, I saw your car downtown. I trust your son Kevin is having a good first year at State. It would be a shame for his tuition scholarship to be reevaluated this month. My stomach dropped. He was threatening her kid. He did not even use the HOA system. He used her son's name. It was a clear, direct personal strike. Maria snatched the phone up. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor loudly. I can't, she gasped. I can't do this. He has my son. He has everything. She frantically pressed buttons on the library computer. I'm deleting the local file. The server won't show the connection, but I have to delete this. She ripped the thumb drive out. She tossed the papers at me. They were the printed spreadsheets. Take this. This is the only copy. Do not call me. Do not look at me. I'm out, she said. Her voice was flat with terror. I never saw you. I never talked to you. She ran. She walked fast out of the library and was gone. She left me completely alone. I was left sitting in the dark, quiet corner. I held the pages in my hands, the heavy proof of the theft, the coordinates of the pipe that lay buried under my yard. I started sifting through the pages. The numbers swam, the columns blurred. I found the section on land lease income, which was the water sales. It looked legitimate until you knew the context. As I held the top page, I noticed something strange. The page was numbered at the bottom, page 1 of 30. I flipped to the back, page 30 of 30. Wait. I went back to page 1. The document header said, Q4 Budget Detail, Part A. I stared at the pages again. I went through them one by one. I checked the page numbers. They were all sequential. Then I realized it. Maria, in her rush and terror, had printed Part A. She had given me pages 1 through 30. But the document summary at the top said Part A. It was only half the file. The critical second half, Part B, which probably contained the real sign-offs and bank transfers that would connect David directly to Aquarian Solutions, was missing. The proof was incomplete. It was easy for David to dismiss as a partial document. I looked down at the paper. It was my only lifeline. My ally had abandoned me. My house was about to be taken. And now the proof I had was only half a story. David was ready to tear it apart. I had to go public, but I had a weapon with a broken barrel. The foreclosure paper was my breaking point. I had incomplete proof of massive theft. I had a lawyer closing in on my house. David had won the first 4 rounds. I couldn't afford to wait for a lawyer. I had to go loud now. I spent all of Wednesday night making copies, 30 pages of financial spreadsheet data. Part A, the part that showed the illegal water money disguised as land income. It wasn't the whole story, but it was enough to make people ask questions. I wrote a short, angry note. It explained the fines, the stolen cistern, the drought, and the money that was going to David's family, hidden as Aquarian solutions. I told them to look at the documents. I signed it, a concerned neighbor. Around 2 in the morning, I put the stack of papers in a backpack. I drove slowly through the subdivision. I wore dark clothes. I felt like a criminal, but I was the only honest person working that night. It took me almost 2 hours to hit every house. I had to walk up driveways and slip the envelope into mail slots or under doormats. I heard a dog bark once and froze solid behind a bush. I was scared I'd get caught and David would use it to get a restraining order. I got home just before the sun came up. I hadn't slept. I sat on my couch and waited for the world to burn. The fire started around 9 a.m. My phone buzzed constantly. I checked the HOA community forum. It was a disaster. Did anyone else get this crazy packet? The water theft claims are insane. Is this real? I always knew David was too smug. $150,000 for a tiny pool? The confusion was immediate. People were angry. They were scared. They were talking about the foreclosure notice on my house. Then David showed up. His post was pinned to the top of the forum within 30 minutes of the first complaint. It was long, calm, and professional. He wrote that he regretted this disturbing campaign of misinformation. He said the documents were stolen, partial, and potentially altered. He said the person spreading them was a delusional former resident who is financially desperate. He used my debt against me. He was telling everyone, don't listen to the guy who is losing his house because he won't pay his bills. The worst part was, it worked. The homeowners started to calm down. Look, the spreadsheet is missing pages, one person wrote. It says Part A if it's a real document. Where is Part B? I don't like David, but that guy did get a fine for his ugly light, another person posted. He was isolating me again. An hour later, I got a text message. It was an emergency alert from the HOA system. Mandatory video conference meeting. 1 p.m. today. I logged into the meeting. I sat there in my tired shirt. I was surrounded by little squares of my neighbors' faces. David was the main window. He looked rested, sharp, and wore a suit jacket over a clean white shirt. Good afternoon, everyone, David said, his voice smooth and commanding. I appreciate you all joining this urgent session regarding the current disturbance. He spoke for 10 minutes. He never raised his voice. He calmly explained that the anonymous document leak was a direct attack on the community's financial stability. The person who distributed these partial fraudulent documents is acting out of malice, David stated, looking right into his camera. He owes the association nearly $8,000 and is now under formal collection proceedings. This is a desperate attempt to avoid paying his lawful debt. I tried to talk. David, you know that money is being funneled offshore. David hit a button. My microphone cut out. As you know, David continued, ignoring me completely, the board is protected by the covenants. We have now moved to legally protect ourselves and the honest financial interests of the association. He introduced his lawyer, who was on the call. The lawyer, a slick-looking man named Alan, immediately shared his screen. Alan had filed legal paperwork. It was an emergency civil injunction against me and against any unnamed conspirators for libel, theft of organizational documents, and defamation. This is not a board issue anymore, David said, his voice now grim. This is a legal matter. This individual is now subject to a restraining order preventing any further distribution of these stolen materials. The court has agreed with the association. The homeowners in the little video squares started nodding. They were scared of lawsuits. They were scared of lawyers. David had turned my protest into a crime. He had neutralized the evidence simply by claiming I stole it. I typed furiously into the chat box, but David had turned the chat off. I was silenced. I was watched. I had used my best evidence, and David had simply put a legal gag order on. If the money was gone, Maria was gone. Now my voice was gone. I logged off the call. I felt a crushing exhaustion. I walked over to the stack of budget pages, the one I had copied all night. I picked up the first page. Q4 Budget Detail Part A. I crumpled the paper in my hand. Part A was nothing without Part B. David had known the documents were incomplete. He knew they were easy to dismiss. I had wasted my one shot. The house was next. Suddenly, I heard a loud metallic thunk from the front yard. Then another sound, like a hammer hitting wood. I walked slowly to the front window. I pulled the curtain back just a fraction. 2 men were standing in my ruined front lawn. They wore bright safety vests. They were using a sledgehammer to drive a post into the ground right next to the street. They finished their work quickly. They got back in their truck and drove away. I walked out my front door and stood on the porch. The sun was hot and unforgiving. There it was, a big sign, bright red and white, professionally printed and sunk deep into the dirt where my cistern used to be. It was facing the road so every car that drove by would see it. The huge letters read, "Foreclosure pending." Below that, smaller words, HOA lien due to unpaid debt. David didn't just want my house. He wanted the entire neighborhood to watch me lose it. He wanted to shame me into absolute silence. I was now publicly branded as the community loser. The foreclosure sign was bright red. It was a warning to everyone. It told the world I was a failure. David had done it. He had taken my dignity and was taking my house. The auction date was set for next month. I looked at the sign. I looked at the muddy, messed-up hole in my front yard. I had lost everything, but I still had the one piece of paper, the one Maria had shoved into my pocket. The paper with the coordinates, the numbers that showed where David's illegal pipe was buried. I drove out of the subdivision. I drove to a hardware rental yard miles away. I needed a machine, something small, something I could handle. I couldn't afford a construction crew. I rented a small trench digger. It was small enough to fit in the back of my old truck. I paid for it using the last of my savings. I brought the machine back under the cover of darkness. I parked the truck in the garage. I waited until 3 a.m. I felt like I was breaking the law, but David had already ruined my life. I had nothing to lose. I wheeled the noisy machine out onto the lawn. I used the coordinates from the note. I measured out the spot. It was exactly where the center of my cistern had been before the HOA thugs stole it. I started the engine. It was loud. I hoped the noise would not wake anyone up. I dug slowly. The machine chewed through the dirt and roots. After 30 minutes of digging, the air felt cold and tense. I was 6 inches down. The ground was hard. Then the blade of the digger hit something soft. Scrape, scrape. I stopped the machine. I jumped down into the shallow trench. I used a small hand shovel to clear the dirt. There it was, a thin white line. It was not a professional city pipe. It was cheap, thin PVC. It was a narrow line covered in mud. It looked like a garden hose pipe, but bigger. David's secret water line. The one he was using to steal water during the drought. I pulled out my phone. I took pictures of the pipe. Close-ups, wide shots showing the pipe running right under the spot where the foreclosure sign was planted. I even took a video, talking low, explaining what the pipe was and what David had used my stolen cistern to cover up. I covered the pipe back up quickly. I put the dirt back in the trench. I hosed off the machine. The digging was done. Now I had the proof. Physical proof. Something David could not dismiss as a partial budget spreadsheet. The emergency meeting was called for Friday night. It was mandatory. Everyone had to be there to vote on David's continued presidency. The community was split. Some thought I was a scammer. Some were finally waking up. I walked into the clubhouse at 7 on the dot. David was already there. He was at the head of the table. He was laughing with Carol, the older board member. He looked untouchable. I saw Kevin, the nephew, sitting near the door. He gave me a cold, hard glare. The room was packed. People stood along the walls. The air felt heavy. David started the meeting. He talked about healing the community. He spoke about the lies that had been spread. "We are here to vote on whether I have served the board adequately," David said. He smiled wide. "I believe I have. I have maintained our property values against those who violate our covenants." He looked right at the foreclosure sign in my yard. Everyone knew he meant me. He opened the floor for discussion. The conversation went around in circles. People complained about the light pollution fine, but David shot them down with legal talk. Finally, David pointed at me. "Mr. Johnston, you have 1 minute to speak before we vote. Keep it civil." I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke to the neighbors standing along the walls, not David. "David Miller is a thief," I said, short and simple. David immediately banged his gavel. "Out of order, defamation. You fined me $7,300 for my rainwater cistern," I continued, ignoring the gavel. "You said it was an unauthorized retention system. You used a pool rule." I pulled my phone out. I walked up to the large blank screen the board used for presentations. I connected my phone. The first picture flashed onto the screen. It was the white PVC pipe buried in the mud. "That pipe is illegal," I announced. "David Miller ran it from the main neighborhood water line to sell our water to a bottling plant outside the subdivision." The room went silent. You could hear the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. "That pipe was buried exactly where my cistern was," I said. "He didn't remove my cistern because of a rule. He removed it because I was about to dig up his crime. He stole my property to cover up grand larceny." David stood up fast. He was not smiling anymore. His face was dark red. "This is falsified evidence," David roared. "This man is violating a court injunction. He is a liar and a debtor." "I have the coordinates," I said, pointing at the screen. "Maria, the board secretary, leaked the information. It proves he was using the $150,000 to cover the maintenance of this illegal tap line." I looked at Kevin. "K-Systems, your nephew's company, is part of the shell game." Kevin suddenly grabbed his briefcase and tried to leave the room. He bumped past people. 2 people blocked his way. "You are stealing our water during a drought," a woman from the back shouted. "We are voting now," David yelled. He tried to take control. He tried to rush the vote. "All those in favor of keeping me as president." 2 hands went up, David's own and Carol's. "All those against." Every single person in the room raised their hand. Everyone. It was unanimous. David was out. David looked around the room stunned. He started to scream. He screamed about procedure and legal threats. He snatched his briefcase and shoved past the tables, knocking over a tray of cookies. He stormed out the door. The sound of his car tires spinning on the gravel was the last thing we heard from him. The meeting fell apart. The police were called. Not by me, but by 3 different neighbors who had already called the Attorney General's office about the water theft. 2 days later, the real devastation arrived. A state attorney general's investigator showed up. David Miller and Kevin were arrested late that afternoon on fraud and grand larceny charges related to utility theft. The next legal document was the big one. Because the fraud was so widespread, and because David had used the covenants to enforce his criminal schemes, the court declared the entire Preserve Creek Homeowners Association bankrupt. The state placed the HOA into receivership. All the assets were frozen. The clubhouse was locked up. The budget was gone. The pool was locked down. The court declared the covenants and bylaws null and void until a full financial audit could be completed. The audit would take years. The association no longer existed. It was destroyed. My foreclosure was immediately dismissed. The lien was lifted. I won the war. I stood on my front porch a week later. I pulled the bright red foreclosure sign out of my yard. I threw it in the back of my truck. I looked at my lawn. It was a giant mud pit. The cheap PVC pipe I had exposed was still buried under the dirt. The cistern was still a pile of junk in a ravine outside the neighborhood. My savings were gone, spent on the trench digger and minor legal fees. I had no HOA dues to pay, but the roads were cracking, the streetlights were flickering, and the grass in the common areas was turning brown. No one was going to fix anything for years. I had my house, but I was stuck in a ruined, silent, legal wasteland. The fight was over, and I was left staring at a muddy field of absolute victory.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share.